Hello. Aha. There we go. Good evening, everybody. It's actually working tonight, so that's exciting. We are going to get started with chapter 12, and I'm trying something different with the camera today, so if it just stops working, ignore it. It's also storming. Well, it actually is currently stopped, but it's supposed to storm until after Bible study tonight. So typically if it rains here, the power goes out almost instantly. And so if the stream just cuts off randomly, just give it about 10 minutes and we should be back. That is how long it takes my internet hardware to restart. So hopefully, though, that won't happen and we'll be good to go. So we're going to start with Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 11, I mentioned last week, is all about the work of faith. And Hebrews chapter 12 is about the endurance of hope. Excuse me. And so the whole point of chapter 12 is endurance. And there's another warning in here, the last warning in the chapter, or in the book. There's a lot of warnings in the book about different things. And so we'll look through these as much as possible and try to get a better understanding of what's happening here. So starting with verse 1. Let me get this over here. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Couple things. So there's, I think, a lot of modern day applications to the cloud of witnesses. But the way that Hebrews 11 and 12 are linked together, the author is pretty clearly talking about the people he has listed or has been unable to list in the previous chapter. And so Hebrews 11 being about the work of faith, and then moving into endurance, he sort of takes those that have done the work of faith and transitions it into an endurance race. And so the cloud of witnesses can apply to us in a few ways, but the author is specifically talking about those that have come before that he's already discussed, and that have sort of made it through as servants of God faithfully, regardless of the fact that they had very little to go on, or difficult tasks, or overwhelming odds. They all found a way to overcome with their faith. And that is the basis for the now we can do this even more so because we have Jesus argument. They did it with way less. And the way that we do that is how do we endure in faith through difficulty and through commission? Well, there's a few things. So the first off, he says, lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares us, or in this translation, throw off everything that hinders and that so easily entangles and run. So I mentioned this in the little devotional a couple weeks ago. This is two different things. This is there's two distinct things here that we're talking about. We were talking about things that are sinful and will trip us up in the race. And if you follow the analogy of the straight and narrow, it's the sinful that cause you to get off the path. If you're running a race and you trip on something, you kind of, you're not running the race anymore. You're laying on the ground. And so there are sinful things that can entangle us and stop us from running the race and keep us from moving forward, regardless of the fact that we may want to. But on top of that, a lot of Christians are willing to accept that there are things that will stop them and work against these sinful things, but are sort of these middling, lukewarm Christians that have a lot of stuff in their life that will distract them from moving forward. And so when they spend the majority of their time doing things that are not kingdom bound, or even it's perfectly fine to have rest and leisure and hobbies and things like that. But for a lot of us, those are not in keeping with the holiness of God. And for a lot of us, those are not necessarily the most effective use of our time, even in leisure. And so you have to recognize that though it may not be inherently sinful, it's also not helpful. And so if it's not helpful, then you have to eliminate it. And this is one of the best places that I see this in the Bible. It's easy to fill our time and our energy with busy work. That's what Dad said. But if that is requiring you to sacrifice any kingdom work, then you need to evaluate that and eliminate it from your life. Hey, good evening, Corey. So, and let us run, starting on verse. Well, we're in the middle of verse 1 here, actually. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. A couple things one thing I missed, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, depending on, so Dad said this can include business at the church, and that's what we're talking about, the things that are detracting from our ministry or from God's ministry and kingdom building for us. We can throw ourselves at the church. It's easy to do in the Army as an officer. You can just get real bogged down in administrative stuff and never have an ounce of ministry and be very successful, and that's problematic. We're not, because that is something that we're supposed to sort of work through ourselves and eliminate from our life. So you got to find people that can help you keep that in check, that you trust, to say this, sure, this may not be sinful, but it's definitely not good for you right now. You might want to prune that out. So, in Hebrew or in Greek, the idea of witnessing something, and we're actually going to talk a little bit about the active participation of receiving information that is implied in Hebrew on Sunday. But to witness something in Hebrew is to observe something and then to tell people about it or to explain it to somebody. And so witnessing isn't just watching. Like, you're not surrounded by a bunch of people who are watching you struggle. They're telling us, they're showing us, the people that have lived their life as Christians, or those that are in this book, or those in our family or our friends that have effectively fought a good faith fight. They are speaking to us with their life. They are explaining to us what this faith journey is and how it works and how difficult it can be and how to overcome it. And so it's not just an act of watching, it is also speaking into it and explaining it. And so a witness in a court case is probably the best example that we still use. That's somebody who has to have seen something and explain what they saw. So that is expected in this word, witnesses. And so they're witnessing to us. And then you can kind of pull into this 1 Corinthians as well. 1 Corinthians 9, which is to run the race according to the rules. I'm not sure that that's what the author has in mind, but you can definitely make this connection where he's sort of talking about how there is a race and there are certain ways that we can run it effectively. You cannot trip each other up, and in a 100-meter dash, there are rules as to what you can and can't do. But essentially what he's saying is you have to actually be running and you have to be in the race. You can't be off to the side. You can't have one foot in a race. You have to be sprinting with both feet, with your heart, with your lungs, moving forward. And it takes endurance to do that. So we see endurance become a big priority here in chapter 12, verse 1 and 3. And we see it again in chapter 10, verse 36 as well. For the joy set before him, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So consider is also an interesting word that we probably don't have the full depth of just by reading it in English, but it does mean work through point by point. So to consider something in Greek is to really analyze every aspect of it. And so you're going to read the story of the cross and the crucifixion and the resurrection and the life of Jesus. And so consider him who endured such opposition, so that you will not grow weary. So we know that we have to throw off what is hindering us, what is slowing us down, what is tangling us up, and run with perseverance. How do we run with perseverance? Well, we focus on Jesus and we work through step by step, detail by detail, getting to know his life and his ways as he was on earth, and absorb it into our life and make it our life. Consider him, analyze every attribute, every verse, every point. And at that point, when you're focused on that, you're going to be more focused on Jesus, and you will run with full endurance and you'll never grow weary. And so that's just kind of the, how do we endure? We're going to push through this. Well, we start with Jesus and we focus on Jesus. You can't start with Jesus and then kind of put him off to the side and be a Christian on Sundays. You need to work and to go forward, and that's just to train. And so that's the consider part. To train in this race would be to consider Christ, would be to work through all of his life. Verse 5. Verse 4. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood, and you have completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as your Father addresses his Son. Couple things. So this word of encouragement can also just be exhortation. It's the same word in Greek. Exhortation and encouragement are the same word in Greek. And so you may see exhortation, or when you see in other letters they have exhortations. Paul usually has an exhortation near the beginning or the end of his letters. It's kind of the compliment sandwich. And you have completely forgotten his word. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastens everyone except his son. Oh, I'm not even on the thing. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate and true sons and daughters of all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who have disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for good, in order that we may share his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those that have been trained by it. Therefore, this is also part of the training, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet so that the lame may not be distracted, but rather healed. And so a lot of what's happening right now is the church in Italy is a little bit more protected because there are going to be Roman citizens than the church in Israel or the church outside of Israel and outside of Rome. While they are about to undergo some very strict persecution from the Roman Empire, and are at the moment kind of in this gray area, limbo area of whether or not they're allowed to worship, many of the church and the apostles at this point have been martyred. And if they're already struggling to not be lukewarm and to not backslide, it's going to get worse. And what he's kind of saying here is that when you go through this life without having been disciplined, right, without feeling the pain really of making mistakes as a Christian and watching the consequences of sin unfold, he's saying that you don't really know, you're not really part of the family, you're not really saved at that point. I mean, not saved, but at some point when you go from being a flawed human to a holy follower of Christ, you're going to have to be disciplined to get there. You're going to feel this pain. And eventually it will produce a good fruit and it will make us better Christians. But most people today are probably very similar to the church in Italy right now, as the author is addressing. They've lived this very protected bubble church life. And he's saying, look, this is coming and it's going to be good for you, but I'm not really certain you can actually resist. Like, you haven't gone through this yet and you're already struggling. So when it comes, don't look at it as another reason to go back to Judaism. Don't look at it as another punishment, but discipline. And so many Christians look at hardship as punishment rather than discipline. And so the Bible follows and is filled with this idea of God as the Father and as our Heavenly Father. If we expect a good parent to give discipline, you should expect God to give it too, and not just kind of mope over it. Work through it, pray through it, and let it help you grow. Strengthen and it will help you train. Like, it is part of the training regiment. Warning and encouragement. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Okay, this comes up a lot. We've talked about this a lot. Running the race as an enduring Christian requires holiness, and it's not an option. You cannot make it through this life as a Christian and not pursue holiness. If you have managed to live the majority of your life as a Christian, or even just the last couple of days as a Christian, and you don't agree with holiness, something's very wrong, and you need to come either talk to me or my wife or somebody you trust in the church. Holiness is a necessity to our life with God. And so this whole chapter is kind of about the ethics for those that are willing and working on enduring in the faith. So this chapter 13 on here, verse 14 on here. And there's some really interesting stuff happening that I think we can take out of context if we're not careful. So see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile the many. So let's see here. This is So verse 15 refers to Deuteronomy 29. Let me pull that up real quick. We're going to start around verse 20. Oh, that's 28. Verse 14. I am making this covenant and this oath not only with you, but also with those who are standing here with us today, in the presence of our Lord and God, and with those who are not here today. Indeed, you know how we lived in the land of Egypt and passed through the nations as you were traveling. You saw their detestable images and idols and made of wood, stone, silver, and gold, which were among them. Be sure there is no man, woman, clan, or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord and goes to be and worship the God of those nations. Be sure there is no root among you bearing poisonous and bitter fruit. Whoopsies. We're not there yet. Okay, this is what he is referring to. That no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up and causes trouble. So I have actually heard people talk about this verse before, as in, like, make sure there is no hostility or tension between you, because bitterness is the root of sinfulness, or bitterness is the root of backsliding, and that is not at all what this is talking about. So remember, this is written to a group of people contemplating leaving the faith or struggling with maintaining in the faith. And this chapter is about endurance. And so the author addresses this here, and he says, look, make sure nobody loses the grace of God or falls short of that. And the way that that's going to happen is you're allowing other people to bring other beliefs and religions into your mind, and to coerce you, to encourage you, to discuss with you following these other gods. For the people in Israel, and so he's kind of referencing Old Testament to show them that the merit of what is here is true and good, but it's still applicable for us for following God. That in Deuteronomy, it's not like the bitterness of an individual just being upset at their neighbor. That's not healthy either, but it's not healthy either, but it's also not as extreme as people have made it. What he's saying is, don't let anybody be among you who is going to pull you away from God and shift your focus onto other sorts of idols. And I think this is really applicable today. We see it in the church a lot, and it can be very tough to deal with, where you maybe don't have somebody who's encouraging other religions. I mean, I know my parents have had to work through a congregation who have had people explicitly sort of pull them away from their theology. That does happen, but in this case, I think our culture today is much more applicable to sort of blurring the lines of what is acceptable in the church, blurring the lines of what is acceptable from culture into the religion or into our spiritual world, which there isn't. Like, that's not a thing, really. Stop trying to do that, people, please. But you see this in the church where you have this open leniency to things that are very explicitly not good for our spirit or for our soul. And a good example of that is, and you can watch pastors and preachers and officers and Christians all over social media talk about TV shows and things that they just shouldn't have on in their home. But we're blurring that line, and it's causing us to shift our focus from Jesus, who we're supposed to be focused on as the author and perfecter of our faith, it says at the beginning of this chapter, and it's shifting it to anything else. Like, we may not be explicitly being pulled away from and towards idols, at least not in the sense of actual physical idols that we're worshiping, but there are things that are ripping people away from the church and their focus away from God. And it's this slow tear, but it's happening, and it's quite a grand chasm now that we have to cross. And so this continues. Sorry, these are my notes, not the not the notes. Oh, I scrolled away here. See that no one is sexually immoral or godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. The church sometimes think that by becoming tolerant, we attract more people. In fact, maintaining highly godly standards. Yeah. And when we become tolerant, we're sort of advertising to the world that as Christians, we're not really any different. Like, there's really no reason for you to be a Christian if all we're introducing is potential guilt, but you can still do whatever you want. Like, it doesn't work, and it causes so many problems, and it has to stop. This part is interesting. I want to see if I'm going to skip something here by accident. So if you read the story of Esau, you can walk away in two ways, thinking Esau squandered his blessing recklessly and unintelligently, or you can come away thinking Jacob was a very deceptive individual, which he was. It is his name, the deceiver, right? And so the other thing that we have to remember, though, is that Esau should not have flippantly just sold his birthright or to pursue his blessing the way he did. He should have been a better steward of all of that. And he went on to marry Canaanite women and just start making poor decisions. And then Edom becomes a huge thorn in the side of Israel and causes all sorts of problems for them until Jacob conquers, or until David conquers them, and then there's a brief respite, and then it all comes back. But they, because of that, become a huge problem for the Israelites. And it's just a message to have good stewardship and to be careful with what you're given and to focus solely on God and not invite other beliefs and squander our blessings. There's a passage here, and I'm trying to remember. I might have to hold on. Let me look up something in Matthew real quick. Matthew. There's a passage here in Matthew 10 that talks about being as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. I don't remember explicitly what verse it is. But it's kind of a good analogy as far as keeping a shrewd and careful watch over who you allow to influence you and being able to minister to them and not causing harm while being as careful as serpents. And so I think the tendency for that is to say, okay, it's talking about a serpent and it's in the Bible, so we're talking about the devil or something. And just please don't do that. That's almost never what the serpent is referring to in the Bible. There's very few instances where that's the case. But if you have ever encountered a snake in the wild, they typically are not aggressors. They're very defensive creatures, and they will do everything they can to scare you away before attacking you if they're threatened. Often they will just run away. Like, snakes are pretty good at discerning who they can attack and who they cannot, and they're very defensive creatures. Matthew 10:16, Dad says. And so what he's talking about is as a serpent, knowing what we can handle in ministry, I think, and knowing what we can actually allow into our life and defend from, which is virtually nothing. Like, there's no line there of like, I'm a strong Christian, or I'm pretty strong-willed, so I'm okay to watch this or to listen to this or to do. No, that's not how it works. But you're always acting defensively for your own well-being, like your own spiritual well-being. I'm not talking about being defensive from humans, and making sure that you're not harming people and steamrolling people along the way. Doing this will help you endure as long as you're keeping it in the context of following what Jesus had done. And so you can continue to pursue peace through that. You do not have to come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. Even if an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I am trembling with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. What's Corey saying? Christians also think that if they do things in their homes, it's okay because they don't act like and watch those things outside of their homes. While they're silently giving up ground on holiness, example, I'm not being a stumbling block to anyone except to you and to your spouse. Yeah, and there's a lot of examples of this, but it is just this split life. People, you cannot compartmentalize your faith. It's either holy, which is both in holiness and seeking godliness, but also in completeness. It's holistic. It's all encompassing. It can't be bits and pieces. You're either a Christian or you're not. You can't be a Christian on Sunday and not on Monday, and you cannot be a Christian in most ways. And even just to say, like, well, I'm working on that, that's not the case. Like, if you know that it's wrong, you're not working on it, you're giving into it. And what you have to start to work on is your prayer life around that thing, your accountability life around that thing. Sorry. Excuse me. And so this is very, very particularly, God's always in the house. I tell this story all the time, about the Christian rapper who came to a conference we were at in training college, and tells a story about how he was driving down the road with his friends before he was a Christian, and they got the music blasting real loud, and there's all these cuss words, and as they drove past the church, they would turn down the music. And then they would keep on, they turn it back up as they got further away from church, like God's at the church and he can't hear us if we just turn down the music. And no, the church has done a problem monopolizing godliness in the building. Zion can be kind of confusing to read in the Bible because it refers to two different things. And in this case, they use both of those things to talk about heaven. So yeah, thankfully he was saved from that, Corey, and hopefully he's moved on. Still don't care for his music, but that's regardless. That's more because I'm an old man, apparently. So Zion can refer to Jerusalem, and it can also refer to heaven. And so Zion in the Old Testament, most often, outside of the prophetic books, refers to Jerusalem. But in the New Testament, most often refers to heaven. And heaven, and the way that Jerusalem is set up, is sort of in a representation of heaven. The way that the tabernacle is set up as a representation of the heavenly tabernacle. All throughout the Old Testament, after Jerusalem has come into Israelite control, and you read about in Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah about the different prophecies of this throne in the middle and the rivers and all that. It's all kind of based around the structure of Jerusalem, which is based around this image of God or of heaven. And so you get both. In this case, it's very specifically talking about the heaven. Yikes. It's very specifically talking about heaven, and he's pulling in these people that have this connection to the Jewish faith and the Jewish scriptures by saying, you've come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. Like, he's trying to keep these connections, sort of keeping their focus in that sense. You've come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. The church of the firstborn is referring to essentially everybody pre-Jesus. This group of people that he's read in the previous chapter. So there's a lot of stuff blowing up on my phone for some reason. You have come to the God, the judge of all, the spirits of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Okay, so very, very quickly and very simply, what we're talking about here is some people, there's this, like, why the blood of Abel? Like, yes, he discussed it in the previous chapter. Abel's blood sought vengeance, and Jesus' blood brings forgiveness, and there's some disagreement about what exactly this means, but that's probably the best guess at it. That where the old covenant blood was about atonement and about appeasement, about eliminating and appeasing that death penalty of sin. It's no longer a sacrifice to appease vengeance or justice. It is of mercy and forgiveness. And so he brings back in the previous chapters of Jesus is better. Like, the whole theme of the book is a better way, or a new and living way. Jesus is better than X. He's better than Moses. He's better than the Torah. He's better than X, Y, Z. And so he's trying to wrap this all back, because he's trying to wrap up this letter, or she or they or whoever's writing this. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we, if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only earth, but also the heavens. The words once more indicate removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence, awe, for our God is a consuming fire. I have once again scrolled past where I wanted to. And so this is our final warning that we get in the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is covered with these encouragements and these warnings. This is the last one that we have in the book of Hebrews. And it's a warning against denying Christ, which is apt. As he comes to a close and he's finalizing his arguments for not falling away and not returning to Judaism, he warns them about denying Christ, because it's one thing to not know Christ and to make mistakes and to speak against him, but it's a whole other thing to have known him and to deny him. And so finally, at the very least, if nothing else I have said has hit home to you people who are thinking about or struggling with this. You cannot deny Christ. He will eliminate everything, including those that deny him. And what we get, and we kind of see, especially in Romans 1, in Romans 1:21, you see that one of the main evidences and the first evidences of denying and of walking away from Christ is thanklessness. Let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably is what he says in verse 28 here. The warning against denying is coupled with this sort of quick message, lesson, little jab. You want to know what denying looks like, or a good indication of it is thanklessness. So, and this is still true. Anybody who is thankless is struggling with their relationship with God. Despite those that are sick or impoverished or struggling, they are still provided for things by God, and it's this thanklessness that begins to breed contentment against it. And so if you know people, or you yourself have found yourself very thankless to what God has provided for you in breath itself, you might need to take a step back and realize what is actually important and how to run the race properly. It's this thanklessness that we need to be very, very careful of. So I think that's everything. 0 drop frames this time, so that's better than the 60,000 last time. Any final thoughts or questions?
I honestly have to say this is probably the most straightforward and direct chapter we've gone through so far. It's very easily understood.
Yeah, it's pretty. He gets quite blunt as the author moves on here. Not tithing is thanklessness. That's very true. And the way that tithing is set up in the Bible leaves people with a lot of leniences. But the amount of people that cannot take advantage of that and still can't tithe is scary, because it is a very good sign of a lack of faith. The reason that the Salvation Army believes what we do about tithing and even about gambling and things like that is from this perspective of, what are you trying to do with what God has given you to get more? It's all about being thankful for what we have and having faith that more will come, or what we need will come. Where you have thanklessness, you have a lack of faith. A thankful attitude is foundational to living a life that reflects Christ to others. There you go. Can add that. That'll be verse 30 for chapter 12. My jaw has been bothering me all day, like immensely. Oh, did I not share the thing in the Facebook? I'm sorry.
I did, though.
Thank you. I saw that, but I just missed it altogether. I totally did that. I just don't know where I did it. So I'm going to call it here because I need to stop talking, because I think that's all I've done all day. But we're going to pray and hopefully share this with your friends if they need it, and we'll come back again on Sunday. Sorry. Heavenly Father, thank you for for what seems to be the continued thankfulness of the opportunity and the technology we have to meet like this in the time that we have, where we're trying to be careful. Help us not to be thankless or live in contempt, or to, especially in this time, be lethargic in our race. Help us to continue to run full steam ahead in this race, even if we're stuck at home or stuck even just, relegated to just the office and the house. Keep us running full steam ahead, Lord, and keep us in your will and in your grace until we return, or till we are able to meet again. Amen. Thank you. It's, Mom, this may be TMI for many, many people, but I did something in my mouth Saturday and got a bunch of canker sores, and whenever that happens for the next week or so, my jaw is screwed up for trying to favor different parts of it. Thanks, Corey. Hey, have a good one.
All right. Well, the baby just got home, so I'm going to go hang out with him for a bit. I'll talk to you later. Thank you again. This is great.
Thanks, John. Have fun. I'll go save my wife. All right. Thanks, everybody. I will be uploading again on Sunday.